This is Gene Krebs.
Hi there. Oh. Whoop. Whoosh.
And we're high on Ohio.
I'm going around this great state. I'm talking to people who know how things work, people who are making a difference in the state. And today I'm up in Toledo and Lucas County, where it's my great pleasure to talk to a wonderful young man I've known now for about the past, 5 years, Joe McNamara, former city council person. But basically, you are that most wonderful and rare of all things. You are a person who's involved politically. You run for office, but you also are very much also about the policy into things. And I'll be real honest with you. One of the main things we're trying to do in this series is to help people, increase our civic capacity in the state. So, what brought you so that you understand both the political and the policy aspects of, Ohio, and especially up here in Northwest Ohio?
Well, the politics runs in the blood. My father, who passed away when I was very young, was a city councilman and county auditor, so that sort of inspired me to...
That was a tragic situation.
Yeah, we were in a car accident together when I was 6, and a tire flew off of another car, and he passed. But, growing up my entire life in Toledo, people told me about what a great person he was.
I remember this. I was in college when this occurred, and I remember... because I went to Bowling Green, I remember all the newspaper reports. Your dad was highly regarded.
Yep, thank you. And so that created this image of this is what you can do with your life to help other people by entering into public service, running for office. And that's what sort of drove me to thinking this is what I wanted to do with my life. I went to University of Michigan undergrad, NYU for my law degree.
Now hold on here. You went to University of Michigan, but I understand that going to what do we call it here, Big Blue, is okay.
Yeah, well, first of all, remember that Toledo was originally supposed to be part of Michigan. There was what's called the Toledo War, where Michigan and Ohio had a almost bloodless war over whether Toledo would be part of Ohio or part of Michigan. And because Ohio was a state, had more political capital, the line for the northern part of Ohio was above Toledo. But the University of Michigan actually had a campus in Toledo, and there were a lot of ties, and there still are a lot of ties to Michigan and Detroit and automobile manufacturing, and in Toledo it's perfectly acceptable to either root for the Buckeyes or root for the Wolverines.
Now I do want the people who are watching this who are Central Ohio based to understand that they live in a bubble and that there's a lot more to Ohio than just rooting for the Buckeyes. And in fact, I'll just share this with you. Son-in-law number 1 went to Ohio State. Son-in-law number 2 went to University of Michigan. Now, the two boys, they each try to go to the other one's football, the home games and everything. And the boys get along great. It's my daughters who trash talk to each other, and neither one of them went to those schools. But in any case, so going back,
the rivalry makes it fun.
The rivalry makes it fun. But so in any case, so you graduated from Michigan,
right? Went to NYU School of Law and came back.
A good law school.
Yep, came back to Toledo, practiced law for a few years, and there was an opening on city council, and decided this is it, I'm going for it, ran for council in 06, won, ran for re-election in 09, won again, served as council president twice, 2 different councils elected me.
So you know how to herd cats.
Yeah, actually I'm very proud of the fact that both times I was president of council during budget discussions, we passed the budget unanimously and early, and that's 12 members voting yes on about half $500 million, so that is pretty good, especially during these rough economic times when there's not enough resources going around for municipal services.
You mentioned earlier, about and the rest of Ohio keeps forgetting about the proximity of Toledo to Detroit. Let me ask you this question. Dayton has a relationship to Cincinnati. It's the smaller, mid-sized city in the orbit of a larger city that has its own professional football and baseball teams. Akron lives within the orbit of Greater Cleveland. Cleveland has its own professional football and baseball teams, although I think some people are arguing whether or not the Browns are actually a professional team right now. Toledo, who do you folks root for in a professional sports
I think there's a lot of Tigers fans in Toledo, and certainly the Lions as well.
Okay.
So yeah, there's definitely that connection there,
So,
sports wise.
are you guys then not dissimilar? I mean, you're a little bit further away from Detroit than what Dayton is to Cincinnati or Akron is to Cleveland, but is the relationship somewhat similar?
There are a lot of similarities and a lot of differences between Toledo and Detroit. I mean, I just don't want to put that across the board, but especially economically and dependence on manufacturing, the automobile. Toledo suppliers are all part of that sort of eastern Michigan, northwest Ohio supply chain for making cars. And of course, we have Chrysler here. We make Jeeps in Toledo, and the GM powertrain plant.
Willys began here.
Right. Willys Overland. Jeep was created in Toledo, and
okay, Toledo's had a long history of just, anytime anybody, and I encourage people who are watching this, if you come to Toledo, don't go to the casino. Instead, go to the Toledo Club, because in the main dining lounge, they have lining the walls of it, and I'm going to try portraits of all the leaders of industry who were from here.
Right.
And
Mike Owens and Locke and
Right. You read those names and you're kind of going, wait a minute, I've heard of that firm.
Right.
There actually was a Mr. Willys of Willys Jeep.
Right.
Which we all know from World War II movies, but
Mike Owens was another inventive genius that spawned lots of different companies like Owens Corning, Owens Illinois. He invented the automatic glass blowing machine to make glass bottles, and so Toledo really had an entrepreneurial spirit and in manufacturing and a real history to adding a lot to the world.
Do we still have that here?
There is definitely been a decline in business in general. You've seen unemployment rise over time. You've seen the city itself, like lots of urban cities, have fallen victim to sprawl and a declining sort of central urban population where you've got middle class flight. And a lot of there were several Fortune 500 companies that used to be headquartered in the city of Toledo proper. Now there's only one. So you're definitely seeing Owens Corning.
Okay.
It's still downtown Toledo.
So let me ask you this question: people out there, okay, we've already busted one myth, which is that people in Toledo are just as loyal to the Ohio State Buckeyes as people in Columbus are. All right, that myth has been busted, I think. All right, so let's talk about other myths. Do you have other myths about Toledo, Northwest Ohio, Lucas County? You could.
A myth I want to bust, and it's not so much about Toledo. It's more about local government and government in general. Is that planning doesn't matter. That I think a lot of elected officials, when they're presented with an issue to maybe violate or change a plan or a land use decision, they look at that narrow decision and not the long-term impacts of planning. And I'm not just talking about urban planning, but planning in general. And I mentioned it before, cities have suffered nationwide to sprawl.
Right.
When you take the same number of people and you spread them out over a larger area, it's more expensive to provide services, it's not as good, you get concentrated poverty, and people, I think, in government, at least I've seen at the local level, don't appreciate planning.
All right, so let's go. You mentioned poverty then. You mentioned lack of planning in relation to poverty. Let's talk about that great bugaboo, concentrated poverty.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of studies. My favorite's been done by David Rusk in his great book Inside Game, Outside Game, where if you really want to fix long-term the poverty problem, you can go ahead and give money to people, but the other thing is, how do you break this poverty cycle? His research indicates it's dispersed affordable housing. That we return to the same model we had back in the 1880s, where you had literally mixed-use housing, and the bank president would live 2 blocks away from the janitor who cleaned the floors at the bank. We don't have that now. How do we fix this?
Well, that's one idea. I mean, the other...
But how do we fix it?
Right. A couple things. One, obviously, are developing economic development policies that help low-income individuals. I think you see in government a lot of press conferences and shovel and groundbreakings, and then there's no sort of follow-up or measurement of what any sort of tax incentive or economic development policies have actually accomplished. And moreover, I think in urban cities, economic development should really be focused on those that need it the most. If you, and I've read studies by Bartek on this, that if you raise the median income of the population that you're trying to help in a city, that helps everything. That helps crime, that helps the tax base, that helps the schools. So focusing on creating opportunities for the people that need them the most, I think is a different approach that electeds and policymakers should go for. I mean, everybody likes to, bring in the big box store or whatever it is and cut the ribbon and plan it, but is that really helping the people that live there, especially since you have so much migration? So say you open up a new store in Toledo or whatnot, it doesn't really help the people who live here if the jobs are being filled by people from the suburbs that come and drive in and then leave. So that is one issue. Then education is another issue, because what I think we see is a lot of generational poverty where habits or processes to get out of poverty aren't learned or appreciated. And something that we have in Toledo that disclaimer, my wife works in this area, are the financial opportunity centers, and through financial coaching they work with clients to coach them and teach them skills of breaking bad habits that keep you in poverty. For example, opening a bank account as opposed to cashing your check at a convenience store. I mean, the fees, avoiding payday lending, not using rapid refund places. Like, there are things that people can do to increase their net worth and build their credit score and build opportunities to come out of poverty.
All right, then let me ask you this question. Ohio, and indeed much of America, is a data desert. We have programs, we propose programs. How do we know if these programs work? How do we know?
Right. Well, in the Financial Opportunity Center model, they use software called Efforts to Outcome software, where they'll actually track client cases, and you can measure someone's credit score. So if someone is
then you have
a
hard third-party measurement of whether or not you've been successful or not.
And I think
that's very good.
Yeah, I think you're starting to see
has the state
best practices. I don't think so. I think that Annie Casey Foundation is responsible for this model, and then LISC locally and the United Way have been involved in creating financial opportunity centers.
How about Job and Family Services with...
yeah, they have. I think they were a funder of it as well.
Okay. Well, this is very... See, this is...
You need to interview my wife to get more into this.
But this is the thing that we're trying to discover here is, so what's working? And so here is a program that seems to be working, and we're definitely going to flag this to see if we can start doing so. Let me go back to human services just for one short little thing. All right. We talk a lot about, it's a fad, I'll call it, for city mayors to take over the school system. Okay? It's a fad right now. No city mayor has yet said, I want to take over the human services divisions. Okay? They generally leave that to the county, or in some states, the state does it. The county has a small de minimis role in that. Why don't mayors and city councils say, let us run Job and Family Services? How come?
That is very interesting, and I don't think that's even
never
lost the minds of
people just screaming out of the room when they bring this up.
No, I think that is very interesting, because certainly the city, at least in Lucas County, Toledo, where you've got the concentrated poverty mainly in Toledo, though we're seeing nationwide poverty in the suburbs is growing. That might make sense because city government is closer to the constituents that are in poverty.
And it has more direct stake than the suburbanites. Here it would be in Ottawa Hills is your affluent suburb here.
And I guess it's probably a structure of many different types of governments we have in Ohio, and you've talked about this a lot in your different series. And just that Job and Family Services in terms of tends to it's set up through the county government instead of through cities.
Well, there has been a proposal here at one time for Lucas County to go into Unigov. That was all hot and heavy in the media here about 10 months ago, and I haven't heard boo about it since. They take everybody out on a boat, and nobody came back. What happened here with that?
There are, two things. There was talk about Unigov maybe 10 years ago. The most recent talk that you're thinking of was switching county government from the row offices to an executive with a county council.
Yeah.
So right now we elect a county coroner and
Right,
a county
the charter-
auditor and a county treasurer.
The charter form.
Right.
What happened to that?
It just didn't have enough. I think it might have been too esoteric to have the sort of popular support needed. And Cuyahoga County switched to that, but they were in the midst of scandal, and that made people very aware of what was going on. I think most people don't really think about local government that often at all, and the expense of local government, because when you tack on counties and villages and cities and townships, I mean you're paying for all those levels of local control.
Yeah. Well, so as you talk about all this, we've talked about and long term you've heard me say I'm not worried at all about Toledo because you have a great port here, but nevertheless, what keeps you up at night?
Growing rate of poverty in Toledo. Yeah, I mean, I think that at the city level, electeds aren't focused enough on this problem, because I think poverty is the root of many of the other issues plaguing cities: tax base, crime, abandoned houses.
So do we fix it by what? Do we? Okay, I mean, there's several. The libertarian would say, well, we cut all programs, we cut all taxes, and we create an economic ecosystem that allows small businesses to grow and flourish.
Total laissez-faire, laissez-faire, Wonderland.
Yes, yeah. And then you have the other portion would say, well, we need to redistribute the money, redistribute the wealth, more of a small S socialistic model. What are you seeing here? How's it going to play out, do you think, and what would be the best solution here for...
Mixed approach. Job training is important, economic development is important, and then teaching financial literacy and financial coaching are all different approaches. It's a complex problem. People suffer...
complex answers? Oh my gosh! Don't ever run for elective office again. Yeah,
well, maybe I needed to be clearer in some of the things I ran on. But no, I think government needs to be smarter. I think government needs to measure outcomes on everything, whether it is a program to help the poor or whether it's economic development. Measuring outcomes and gathering data is good, and government tends not to do that, especially at least on the local level, where again. Short terms and elections, people tend to want to get that good media hit now, and who cares, what happens with the project and if it was good or not in the future.
So, you're obviously very literate. You're a great policy person. So, what have been the books that you've read that you would recommend to our viewership out there that they themselves should go out there and read? Have you read any good books lately? Or written any good books?
No, I'm reading a book that's not a policy book, but I actually brought it, The Mother Tongue, How English and How It Got That Way.
Oh, I've heard of this.
It's a very interesting book, because if you know any people that are very strident in grammar and spelling and whatnot, it's hilarious the way English developed and has so many influences from other languages, and our spellings are inconsistent internally, and the sounds of the letters are inconsistent, and
being a lawyer, you know that the sentence construction and being clear and concise in what you write and what you say matters a lot to a judge.
Absolutely. But in defense of English, what is so wonderful about the language is we have so many shades of meaning, because English tends to be a language that absorbs other words from other languages. So, a simple example might be party versus soiree. Soiree being French. Soiree sounds like a more,
well, up-to-do.
Right, exactly.
Uptown.
And there's lots of examples of English being able to
adapt.
Give you those different shades of meaning.
Okay, all right. Well, this is Gene Krebs, and on behalf of the Center for Community Solutions, we've been here in Toledo, Ohio, interviewing Joe McNamara, one of those very rare people who understands the political aspect and the policy aspect of the whole system of governance and the whole system of civic capacity. I've known this bright young man now for several years, been following his political and policy trajectory for probably well over a decade now. And a very impressive young man. I have no idea what the future is going to hold for him, and I don't think anybody knows, but I know it's going to be a bright one no matter what it is he chooses to pursue here with his years on City Council, everything like that. So on behalf of the Center for Community Solutions, thank you, and tune in for our next episode.
For more about the Center for Community Solutions or their publications, please visit www.communitysolutions.com.